Jonathan was coming any minute, so I gave the room one last critical look and made some changes to a fork here and a napkin there just right, which made my heart race with a mix of nervousness and excitement as I heard his car pull into the driveway. The front door opened and I walked in. I wore my dress one last time and stepped into the hallway. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," I called out. Jonathan entered with a booming voice, looking as handsome as ever in his clean white shirt and dark pants. Even after all these years, his presence continued to make me hold my breath. "Hey," I disregarded it because I believed it was simply a result of his long workday. I felt my heart skip a beat when he held out a small, beautifully wrapped box. I led him into the dining room and watched his face for the look of gratitude I had been waiting for all day. "Wow, Maria," he said, his eyes moving over the carefully set scene. "You really put it all on the line." There was something off about his voice, a note I couldn't quite place. It made me feel guilty and disappointed. Aware that nothing could ruin our evening, we put our thoughts aside and sat down to dinner. I poured each of us a glass of wine. I raised my glass to share a glass of the wine we had saved for this occasion. Jonathan put his chin on mine and smiled tightly as we ate. I tried to start a talk with him about our favourite memories and our hopes for the future, but Jonathan wouldn't listen. Jonathan appeared preoccupied as he ate, responding with a single word. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked. But he couldn't answer. "Ignoring the knot that's growing in my stomach, you seem far away." Jonathan looked up from his plate, and his eyes met mine for what seemed like the first time that night. "I'm just tired," he said with a forced smile, "since things have been crazy." As I set the table and spent hours creating a rich chocolate cake for dessert, Jonathan finally seemed to wake up. He reached for it. He brought in a box and slid it across the table to me. "Open it," he said with a strange look in his eye. As I carefully untied the ribbon, my heart raced. This was it, the thing that would make up for his weird mood all night. Perhaps it was the necklace I'd been eyeing, or perhaps it was the tickets. I opened the box to that play I'd been hinting at for months and felt confused. A thick stack of neatly folded legal papers filled the box. I glanced at the first page, and then the world seemed to tilt on its axis as I tried to think of what to do. How could I make sense of what I was seeing? There had to be a mistake, right? I teased Jonathan and eyed his face for signs of deception. It was real, but I didn't see the loving husband I thought I saw. Instead, I saw a stranger with a smirk on his face. He said it with sarcasm in his voice and cold, detached surprise in his eyes. Before I could even write a thought, let alone a sentence, I heard laughing coming from the kitchen. Mike and Dave, two of Jonathan's friends, were standing in the hallway, laughing so hard they were sore. The realization that it wasn't just a cruel joke hit me like a blow to the chest. With a sense of premeditated embarrassment, tears filled my eyes as I turned to face Jonathan. "How could you?" I begged, my voice breaking. After 10 years and 2 children, Jonathan leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "This is how you choose to end it," he said. "Come on, Maria. You should know this was going to happen. We've been growing apart for years." I just wanted to make it special by using the word memorable. Each time it played, it repeated in my head like a knife twisting in my gut. The roses, which I had spent hours preparing, suddenly seemed insignificant. Despite my best efforts, he made our love a show for himself. I quickly stood up. The chair squeaked loudly on the floor, and the room whirled around me as I struggled to breathe. I ran away without saying a word. In the dining room, where people were desperately trying to get away from the unbearable air of deception and shame, I could hear Jonathan. He was calling after me, and his voice was a mix of amusement and mild worry. I didn't stop in the hall, though. I grabbed my coat, and as I struggled with my shaking bag and the front door, I heard footsteps behind me. "Maria, don't be so dramatic." The way Jonathan said, "It's just a bit of fun," made me feel bad. I turned my face towards him. Him. Tears were running down my face and I barely got a word out. You say things like destroying our marriage and putting me down in front of your friends above a whisper. For a moment I thought I saw a hint of regret in his eyes, but it was truly just for fun. As soon as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by an annoying smirk that expressed, "You always took things too seriously." I shrugged my shoulders and remained silent. I slammed the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. The cold outside was a stark contrast to the warmth of the house we had built together. I hurried to my room, the muffled sounds of laughter returning with every chuckle. It felt like yet another betrayal, another blow to the foundation of our marriage. I slammed on the brakes and lost control of my car. Ernest's deep sobs caused my entire body to tremble, and tears began to fall. How had I been so blind? I sat there, surrounded by the familiar scent of leather and the subtle scent of the air freshener Jonathan had gifted me for Christmas. After what felt like hours, my world fell apart around me. I think it took me only minutes to calm down enough to start the car I needed to get away from the house that now felt like a memorial to my broken dreams without giving it much thought. When I got to my sister Clara's house, I knew that she could help me figure out what was going on. As I drove through the busy streets of our suburban neighborhood, my mind was racing with ideas of what I should do. Talk to your kids about the feelings I would experience if our friends and co-workers looked down on me and spread rumors. I felt nauseous, and a deep-seated question consumed me. Why had Jonathan decided to terminate our relationship in this manner? Was our whole marriage just a joke to him? By the time I pulled into Clara's driveway, I already felt empty. As the shock wore off, a deep, painful emptiness took its place. I was strong enough to raise my hand and ring the doorbell. When Clara opened the door, one look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Oh, Maria," she breathed as she pulled me into a tight hug. I finally broke down in my sister's arms. I don't know how I did it. I sat in Clara's living room for a long time with my makeup smeared and tissues squished in my lap. Time had stopped. As the events of the night played over and over in my mind, Clara, bless her, didn't force me to talk. When I was feeling down, Clara simply sat next to me and gently placed her hand on my back. I finally found my voice, but it was like a hoarse whisper. He had papers for a divorce. Clara, on our anniversary, the words hung in the air, heavy as if you could touch them. Only the sharp intake of breath revealed Clara's shock. "Son of her," she said, but stopped herself before saying it again. "Maria, I am deeply sorry. I am unable to fathom the situation." I shook my head in disbelief, but I was unable to contemplate it. His friends were laughing as if it were a joke. When I thought about his friends' snickers and Clara's voice rising in anger, the shame burned even more. It's your life and your marriage. Does he think he's some frat boy pulling a joke? Her anger helped, strangely enough. Ground me. It was easier to think about how upset Clara was than to deal with my own feelings. I married the man I thought I knew, but now I don't know who he is. "But this is a stranger," Clara said as she stood up and paced the room. "Is there more to this? Is he seeing someone else?" That was the question that struck me hard. Amidst all the shock and pain, I hadn't even considered the possibility of a physical attack. I'm uncertain as to what I said, and the realization that I was no longer well informed about my husband's life caused me to cry once more. I assumed that Clara had sat back down, clasped her hands together and said, "Listen to me, Maria. It's not your fault what's going on." When it came to Jonathan, I believed that whatever caused this was his fault, not yours. I randomly nodded. I wanted to believe what she said, but couldn't. My mind was already running as I tried to figure out what she meant. I missed the signs every time I talked to someone at dinner or late at night at work because I was busy. I was too preoccupied with enjoying my own life to notice the signs that my marriage was crumbling. The kids were sitting up straight, and I thought, oh God. "Clara, what am I going to say to Emily and Max about the thought of my kids being joyful and carefree at their grandparents' house?" Clara squeezed my hands and stated,
You are not required to resolve that matter. I have already released you. You rest tonight, and tomorrow we'll start making things right. I took a shaky breath, grateful for my sister's practicality. You're right. I couldn't believe this was actually happening.
As the shock wore off, other realities began to take over. Where would I go? Where would I live? Would I need to find a new job? And how would we manage the custody of each new child? The question weighed heavily on me. I feel so stupid, I told them, my voice barely above a whisper. All day I was so happy I thought we were celebrating our love for each other. We were living our life together, and he was on the verge of revealing something significant. You're not stupid, Maria. You're loving and trusting. Those are beautiful words. Jonathan should be ashamed of these traits. We were quiet for a while. As Clara's old clock ticked, it was the only sound in the room that made me think of earlier that night. Everything I had meticulously planned, hoped for, and eagerly anticipated crumbled. It all seemed like a cruel joke now that I thought about our wedding day. I broke the quiet by saying how pleased we were. Were you so full of dreams? When did everything go wrong, Clara? Where did we go from there? We decided to file for divorce on our anniversary. Clara shook her head. I don't know. It's not easy to end a sweetheart relationship the way you did. That's just mean. As the night went on, tiredness started to set in. The emotional toll of the night left me worn out, so Hollow Clara put me up in her guest room and brought me a drink. She advised him to put on some soft clothes and drink some water to help him sleep. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you'll get through this. You're stronger than you think. I expressed my heartfelt gratitude to my sister for her assistance in adjusting to the new bed, which reminded me of my own bed at home. Would Jonathan be sleeping there tonight? Or would he be out having fun? He felt free with his friends, but when he finally fell asleep, it was a bad one. I woke up several times, feeling briefly lost because my dreams were scattered all over the place. It took until morning for the crushing truth of my position to hit me. Before that, I felt as though I had not slept at all. The sunshine that streamed through the curtains was so cheerful that it was almost unbearable. For a short time I felt happy and thought maybe it had all been a bad dream, but the foreign hope was quickly dashed when I felt pain in my chest and had to drag myself out of bed groaning at it. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes were puffy from crying, and my hair was a mess. The morning after my 10th wedding anniversary, I didn't think I'd look like this. The smell of coffee drew me in. I went to the kitchen and found Clara already up and busy. She glanced at me, remained silent, and proceeded to pour me a cup of coffee. A big mug of coffee. "How are you feeling?" she asked as she slid it across the bar. I put my hands around it. Clara nodded as the warm mug released a deep sigh, as if a truck had struck me from every angle. "I can relate to what you're going through. I called in sick to work today and I thought, let's start making plans. What are your next steps?" The idea of making plans for moving forward felt good. It was excessive, but I was aware that Clara was correct. I could not remain in her guest room indefinitely, okay? As I took a sip of coffee, I asked, "Where do we begin?" Clara took out a notepad and jotted down, "Let's start with finding you a lawyer." I know someone who works in family law. The word lawyer made everything sound so good and real, but I agreed, knowing it was the right thing to do. "What about the kids?" "I need to pick them up," Clara said. "Perhaps it would be beneficial to give yourself a little extra time to consider them before you see them." I felt guilty about not running to my kids. Despite Clara's correctness, I knew I needed to bolster my strength and calmness before confronting Emily and Max. As we sat together, strategizing the next few days, I began to experience an unfamiliar sensation. In addition to the pain and uncertainty, I sensed a sudden surge of determination. As Jonathan handed me the papers, his smug expression caught my attention, causing a flash of anger. I told him, my voice was stronger than it had been since last night. He thinks he's so smart. Embarrassed me in front of his friends, Clara looked up from her notes with a smile on her face. "What are you doing?" she inquired. I stood up straight and squared my shoulders. I'm going to show him that I'm not going to lie down and let him walk all over me, joke as the morning went on. A smile spread across Clara's face. Now that's the Maria I know. There were calls, notes, and the start of a plan. With each small step I felt like I was making progress, a little stronger and more in charge. The pain was still there, roaring and pounding, but it wasn't as bad as before. By the time Clara left to pick up the kids, I already had a meeting with a lawyer and a long list of business projects to work on. Gathering papers and making plans was the first step. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy, but for the first it had been a while since Jonathan gave me those papers. But as I stood in Clara's kitchen and looked out at we used to play in this sunny garden when we were kids, I promised myself in my head that this would not break me, Jonathan. He may have broken up our marriage, but I wouldn't let him break me. I heard Clara's car pull into the driveway. As the sound of my kids' return made me take a deep breath, the road ahead would be hard and full of obstacles. I still didn't believe it, but I was Maria Santiago, the daughter of immigrants and sister of I was a mother and a survivor. I had been through storms before, and I would get through this one too. I walked to the front door to calm down. It was time to face my new reality. The walk of shame was over, and now it was time for the walk of strength. The next morning I woke up with a strange clarity. The pain in my chest was still there, a dull ache, but it was as I lay in Clara's guest bed and stared at the strange ceiling, I felt determined by something else. I thought of a plan. If Jonathan wanted to play games, I'd show him how to do it too. I padded downstairs. I walked into the kitchen to find Clara already there, cup of coffee in hand. She looked at me, raised an eyebrow and said, "You look different," she said with a raised eyebrow. I got a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table to think. I started to wrap my hands around the hot mug. Jonathan is really smart to drop those divorce papers like that, don't you think? It was a sick joke, and Clara slowly nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. "He's always liked her little jokes," she said with a bitter tone in her voice. "Well, I think it's time I said this with a small smile playing on the edges of my mouth. It wasn't a beaming smile. The smile was more akin to what a boxer might wear before entering the ring. Clara leaned forward, interested. "What did you have in mind?" I took a sip of coffee and organised my thoughts. "I need more details, as Jonathan has always kept certain aspects of his work confidential. I think it's time I looked into his funds." Clara's eyes got really big. "What do you believe Clara is concealing?" I shrugged and said, "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." The next few days were very busy while Clara watched over Emily and Max and protected them from the storm. After witnessing a fight between their parents, I immediately began my investigation. I began by carefully going through our home office. Soon after going through every file, drawer and secret spot, it became clear that Jonathan had been much more secretive than I thought possible. I found something more secretive than I thought possible hidden behind a fake back in his desk drawer. I found a stack of bank records for an account I didn't know I had. As I turned the pages, my hands shook. The amounts of money involved made their eyes widen. Where did all this money come from? Was just the start. As I dug deeper, a strange pattern began to emerge. His company kept track of work trips that didn't align with their schedule, as well as emails from names I didn't recognize. The emails were filled with secret language that made my skin crawl, and then, buried in a folder of old tax forms, I found a signed 6-month lease deal for an apartment across town. My heart sank. The puzzle pieces began to fit together, the late nights at work. Jonathan could see how all of it made sense now, the sudden work trips and the growing emotional distance. Not only was he considering leaving me, but he had been leading a double life for months or even years due to this situation. When I laid out my case, I talked to the lawyer Clara had suggested, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn Ross. "Everything I'd found out," Mrs. Santiago said with her eyebrows raised. She sat back down and said, "I think we have more than enough here to make sure you get a very good settlement." She stopped with a glint in her eye and said, "If you're up for some poetic justice, I might have an idea." I leaned forward in my chair. I'm listening to Evelyn. Evelyn's plan was bold and even dangerous. But as she explained it, I was thrilled with the opportunity to show Jonathan that I wasn't as easy to get along with as he thought I was. I clearly thought I was over the next week. I threw myself into getting ready. I collected proof, made quiet inquiries, and slowly but surely put together my case while Jonathan stayed. I had no idea that he tried calling a few times in the days after his surprise anniversary, but I let his voicemails be used for calls so he can be alone with his doubts for a while. I sat at Clara's dining room table with papers, photos and printouts in my hands. Everything was in order. I felt a slight tremble as I carefully placed everything into a sophisticated box, similar to the one Jonathan had used for his divorce papers. "Are you sure about this?" Clara asked as she watched me with a mix of worry and admiration. I stopped and put my hand on the box. Was I sure this wasn't like me? I have consistently been the peacemaker, the individual who enhances the situation. But then I thought of the look on Jonathan's face. As he gave me those papers, I could hear his friend laughing in the dining room, which I'm sure made me more determined. I uttered those words while tying a bow around the box the following morning. I woke up early and had barely slept. My mind was spinning with excitement as I carefully picked out an outfit. That made me feel strong and sure of myself as I put on my makeup. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman with determined eyes. This woman wouldn't let you fool her. I drove to Jonathan's house with my heart racing with each mile. I knew he'd be at work, which was great. As part of my plan, I parked across the street and watched as the messenger I had hired brought my pack to the front door. As AG drove off, I felt a strange mix of feelings wash over me. I almost ran in to see Jonathan's face when he opened the box, but I knew that wasn't the smart thing to do. I let him stew in his own bile for a while before I went back to Clara's house. I didn't think this would be easy, or that Jonathan wouldn't go down. My mind was already racing ahead, planning the next steps. Without a fight, especially since he knew I was after him, but for the first since that awful anniversary dinner, I felt like I had the upper hand. When I returned to Clara's, my sister was anxiously waiting for me. "Well?" she asked. As soon as I walked in the door, I immediately relaxed. "It's done," I said with a small smile as I fell asleep on the couch. "Now we wait." It turned out that the hardest part was waiting. As the hours passed, I felt like I tried to distract myself by playing with Emily and Max for days, but my mind wouldn't stop. I kept thinking about that box that was sitting on Jonathan's porch like a time bomb. It was late afternoon when the phone finally rang. Jonathan's name showed on the screen. I took a deep breath. Before answering, "Hello, Jonathan." I took a deep breath and sat back down. Written. The other end of the line had a long pause before Jonathan spoke. When he finally spoke, his voice was a mixture of anger and fear. "What the hell is this, Maria?" he asked. I answered with a small, joyful smile. "Just returning the favour, dear." "You wanted our breakup to be memorable, Jonathan, but this isn't working. Isn't what Jonathan and I cut in law. I think you'll find it to be all of those things, though maybe not funny. At least not for you." There was another long pause. I could almost hear the gears making noise. Jonathan pondered over his next move. "We need to talk," he finally said, his voice low and urgent. "Yes," I agreed, "but not today. I think you need some time to think. First, don't you hang up before you hear back." My hands were shaking, but not out of fear. It was the first time in days that I really felt alive. Clara showed up, and her face was a mix of worry and interest as she stood in the doorway and asked, "Was that him?" It was with a sad smile on my face that I nodded. Let's just say he's not laughing. As I continued to reflect on the events of that day, I came to a realization. Just getting even wasn't enough. I needed my power back. It was crucial to demonstrate to both Jonathan and myself that I was not a helpless victim, but rather a strong individual. I knew I was intelligent and capable, and once I ceased being suppressed, I realized the journey ahead would be challenging. Legal fights, tough talks with the kids, and critical whispers from so-called friends were all part of the road ahead. But for the first time, I was prepared to face everything because Jonathan had broken my world. I looked at Clara and saw worry in her eyes. I forced a real smile and said, "It's going to be okay." It was the first time I had seen Clara in a long time. As the sun began to go down, long shadows fell across Clara's face. I felt at peace in the living room. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I was no longer the woman who walked into that anniversary dinner. I was a stronger, smarter woman ready to fight for my life. Jonathan attempted to dismiss me as a joke, but now he was the one being ridiculed. The next morning, Maria Santiago and I were just beginning our day when I received Jonathan's present. Off my shoulders. I knew the storm wasn't over yet, but at least I was the one in charge. When I went downstairs, Clara was already drinking coffee in the kitchen. As I walked in, she looked up at me with worry on her face and asked, "How are you feeling?" Carefully, I poured myself a drink before answering. "Okay," I said, which was a surprise. I told her with a small smile, "It feels good to get back in charge." Clara nodded, but I could tell she was worried. I asked her, "What's your next move?" while enjoying the warmth of my coffee. We waited for the balls in Jonathan's court, but we didn't have to wait long. Jonathan sent me a text message this morning saying we need to meet in person. I showed this message to Clara. She raised an eyelid. "Are you going to meet?" "I think I have to," I said slowly. After some debate, we decided on a neutral spot, a quiet downtown cafe that we used to frequent in college. As we drove to the cafe, I asked Clara to accompany me, not to participate in the conversation, but to be nearby in case things escalated. I was filled with a range of emotions, including worry, anger, and a hint of sadness. I was filled with a sense of satisfaction and a longing for the past. Clara must have felt my unease because, in a soft voice, she grabbed my hand and said, "Hold all of this. The cards. Don't let him trick you." I nodded, thankful for her help. I got to the cafe a few minutes early and picked a table in the back where I could be out of sight and out of earshot of other people. Clara then settled down. When Jonathan walked in, he was sitting at a table across the room, close enough to help if needed, but far enough away to give us space. I almost didn't recognize him. The confident man who had gifted me the money had vanished. Jonathan smiled as he signed the divorce papers. He looked old and tired with dark circles under his eyes, and he slid into the seat across from me, his perfectly ironed shirt a little rumpled. He glanced around apprehensively before launching into a tirade directed at Maria. I don't even know where to start. I leaned back in my chair and kept a blank face. "How about you? First tell me why you thought it was okay to hand me my divorce papers on our date in front of the words I used that made your friend Jonathan jump." I felt foolish because I believed that I did not. I believed that it would be simpler to turn it into a joke. He ran his hand through his hair and looked lost. It wouldn't hurt as much. Seeing how upset he was made me feel a little better. It was so wrong. The goal was to tell the truth, so I set aside my revenge. He believed that the apartment and the secret bank account were merely figments of his imagination. Shocked and shocked. "How did you do that? I'm not as simple-minded as you may think." "Think, Jonathan," I said coy. It wasn't hard to find once I got going. The breadcrumbs you left behind made him slouch in his seat and look beaten. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said in a low voice as I leaned forward. And intense. "What was the intended outcome, Jonathan? I can't see what you meant." He looked at me and said, "It looks like you've been planning this for months, maybe even years." For a moment I thought I saw a flash of the guy I had married. Maria, it wasn't like that at all. Initially I used the flat as a place to work late, ensuring no one woke me up. I wanted to surprise my kids with a business when I got home late at night. I had already set up the bank account for it. I raised a doubtful eyebrow. When did it change? Jonathan sighed. I don't know how it happened, but the late nights and work hours got later. The journey got harder, and somewhere along the way I lost sight of what was important. As he spoke, I felt a mix of emotions, angry that he had betrayed us, sad about what we had lost, and sorry for the guy in front of me who looked so lost. Why didn't you talk to me? I asked in a lower voice than I meant to. We have worked through this together, he said with a sour smile. I told myself you wouldn't, I said. You did. Try to hold me back. God, I was such a fool. And we sat in silence after years of not talking to each other or understanding each other. Finally, I said, So what's going to happen now? Jonathan looked up with hope in his eyes. You know I've hurt you, Maria. You hurt our family. I wouldn't blame you if you never came back. I thought about seeing you again, but I put out my hand in case there was any way we could try to fix this. Jonathan, I'm not going to lie here like I have the last few days. The last few months didn't happen. You betrayed my trust in the cruelest way possible, something that can never happen. He gave a nod and cast his gaze downward. I understand, I said. I just want you to... I'm sorry for everything I did. I took a deep breath and thought about what I should do next. Pay close attention to your words. I appreciate your apology, but right now I need time to think about what I want and to spend time with our children, who are going to be saddened by everything. This Jonathan nodded again, but he didn't look like the successful businessman he seemed to be. Instead, he looked more like a Chaz-decent schoolboy. Of course, I'll leave the house and give you anything you need in the world. I agreed that would be best. And Jonathan, I think we should. From now on, he looked, let our lawyers handle the details. He looked hurt but agreed, and as he stood to leave, he stopped and looked down at, What's it worth, Maria? I love you. I know I have a terrible way of showing it, but I do. I looked into his eyes and said, I love you too, Jonathan. Love isn't always enough. After he left, Clara joined me at the table. She gently asked, How did it go? With a worried look on her face. I sighed, feeling I'm tired. It was both educational and tiring. I think we're really... She reached out and squeezed my hand over Clara. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, but you did a great job. I'm proud of you. When we left the cafe, I had a strange mix of emotions, of sadness and relief. I didn't know what the future held, but at least I had some clarity. The show was over, and while it didn't go the way I had hoped, it did give me the answers I needed. I went back to Clara's house and saw Emily and Max playing in the garden. I got a new sense of hope as I watched them laugh and chase each other, not knowing that their lives were about to change, feeling of purpose. It didn't matter what happened between Jonathan and me. These two precious souls were what mattered most to me. I joined them in the yard, picked up Max and tickled him until he laughed out loud as Emily ran over. I promised myself and them in my head that we would get through it if they joined in. It wouldn't be easy, but we'd be better afterward that I put the kids to bed in Clara's spare room at night. Emily looked up at me with big brown eyes and asked, Mommy, when are you coming home? I was sad because we were going home, but I was able to smile soon. Things will be a little different for a while, but I promise everything will be okay. I turned off the light. I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath as I shut the door. The show was over, but the real work was still to come. It was time to start over, not with the life I had, but with the life I wanted for my kids. Deserve. I straightened up, took one last look at the closed bedroom door, and walked downstairs. Was ready with a glass of wine and a caring smile. As I sat down on the couch next to her, I felt a spark of hope that the road ahead was rough, but I wasn't going to take it by myself. And for now, that's enough. Was enough. A week had passed since my fight with Jonathan at the coffee shop. Things were moving in a strange new way at Clara's house. The kids were doing their best to adjust. But I could see the worry in their eyes every night when they asked when they could go home. It made my heart a little hurt. Each time, but I knew we needed this time to work things out. Max's homework was already done when I remember this. When my phone rang, it was a text message from Evelyn. "My lawyer wants to talk to you right away. When you come to the office, I get a knot in my stomach. What could be so important?" I quickly asked Clara to watch the kids and drove to Evelyn's office, my mind full of options. Met me with a serious look that didn't make me feel better. "Maria, thank you for coming so quickly," she said as she led me into her office. I sat down in the chair across from her desk and asked, "What's going on, Evelyn?" I took a deep breath. "I talked to Jonathan's lawyer, and it sounds like Jonathan is okay. He's fighting the charges." Everything I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean by everything?" "Assets, the child custody plan we suggested, and even the reasons for the divorce. Evelyn described his claim that it was illegal to get the gift, and that you've been planning to hurt him for months." I felt my blood drain from my body. Face, but that's not true. He's been hiding things while Evelyn held them back. Help me out here. I know Maria, and we have strong proof to support our case. Jonathan has hired a powerful lawyer who is known for being tough, so he is playing hardball. I slouched in my chair. I'm suddenly tired, and I don't remember when we met at the cafe. He even said he was going to try to fix things that people can change. "When people know what they have to lose, especially money," Evelyn said in a soft voice, "they change their minds quickly. And image." I nodded as I tried to figure out what this new information meant. VN leaned forward, her face set on a determined, "we fight, we have" look. "Maria, I know things could get messy, but I promise we're not going to lie." I slowed down as I left Evelyn's office. I couldn't believe what had happened. Things got worse so quickly that I was driving around aimlessly, not ready to face Clara and the kids just yet. I went to the park where Jonathan and I used to play without giving it much thought. Take the kids on the weekends, I sat on a bench and watched couples and families play. Walk hand in hand, everything seemed so normal and calm. What had happened to my life? Become this jumbled mess, my phone rang again. This time it was Jonathan. My eye almost hit the ignore button, but something made me say hello, said slowly. Maria Jonathan's voice sounded stressed. "I think you've heard." I had already closed my eyes when I heard, "Yes, I have, Jonathan." "What are you doing?" Following a long pause, he spoke again, this time with a different, harsher, cooler tone. "I'm protecting myself, Maria, you. I felt a rush of anger because you left me with no choice. You lied and cheated on Dash. I never cheated on you." Jonathan cut him off. "Rising the apartment, the money, it wasn't what?" he said. "If that's what you think, then explain it to me," I asked, "because it looks pretty clear this way." He finally said, "Not over the phone, not like this." I sighed. "When you pinched the bridge of my nose." "Why are you calling Jonathan?" "I don't know. I guess I just wanted to hear your voice to see if there was any way we could work this out without," he said. Lawyers and courts. For a moment I had hope that maybe there was still I thought of a way to save this from going to court, but then I remembered the look on his face when he gave those to me. The sound of his friends laughing at how embarrassed I was, I said quietly, "I think it's too late for that. Jonathan, you made your choice. Now we both have to live with it." I hung up the phone. I understood what this was as I sat in the park and watched the world go by, tired, and before he could answer. This was just the start of a long and tough journey. The next few weeks were filled with meetings with Evelyn, and talks with Clara had moved out, and I was trying to keep Emily's life as normal as possible. Jonathan had also moved out. Being with a friend, he told me that part of me wanted to go back home with the kids, but Evelyn told me not to until there was a formal agreement in place, and the next big surprise came during one of our strategy meetings with Evelyn. She had just finished explaining how we were going to handle the upcoming mediation when her helper knocked on the door. The worried young man said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see." Evelyn a tablet and read what was on the screen. Her eyebrows went up. "This is not good," she said in a low voice. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. Evelyn turned around. On my tablet, I could see that it was a local news site, and there it was everywhere. At the top was a headline that made my blood boil. "Local businessman claims wrongful divorce wife's revenge plot." Exposed, I grabbed the tablet and quickly read the story, shocked to find that it was all of them. A cleaned-up version of our anniversary dinner changed to make Jonathan look like the victim he said he was. For months, I had been gathering information in secret in order to leave him and take everything I had as a gift. Sent him was seen as an attempt to threaten him. I thought, this is crazy. How can they do this? Write this down. Evelyn's face was grim. It's smart of him to try to control the story to make himself look like the one who was wronged. I felt sick, but Dash has proof that it's all lies. But we can't show it to the public until putting our legal plan at risk, Evelyn finished Maria. I'm so sorry I missed it. I slouched in my chair and felt the weight of it all fall on me. What should we do now, Evelyn? Took my hand across the desk and said, we're staying the course. The facts of the case, but we should be ready for things to get worse, When I got out of Evelyn's office, my phone was already full of texts from friends. Family members and even co-workers are all asking about the story, and some are offering support. When they asked for answers, I ignored them all because I needed time to think. As I pulled into the driveway of our old house, which I guess was now my house, it didn't feel like home anymore. Saw a person sitting on the front steps, Jonathan. For a moment I thought about, but I wasn't going anywhere. I got out of the car and went up to him. My voice was surprisingly steady as I asked, "What are you doing here?" My heart was racing. Jonathan looked up, and his face was a mask of mixed feelings. I wanted to warn him. I tried to stop Dash from saving the story, but I cut him off. "Jonathan, you could have stopped it, but you didn't." He stood up and reached out as if to, "I thought about touching you, but I changed my mind." "Maria, please don't do that. Things have just gone completely crazy." I laughed out loud, making a hard, bitter sound. "I know you broke us, Jonathan." "That was your fault," he said softly. "I'm sorry more than you can know." For a second I saw a glimpse of I had fallen in love with that guy years ago, but he was gone in an instant, and the stranger who had been so shady. "Sorry isn't enough," I said, in a voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan asked me, "What are you going to do?" As I turned to go back to my car, I stopped and looked back at him. In being in front of the house we had built together made me feel a strange mix of sadness, anger, and I'm determined, and I'm going to fight, but only for myself and our children. I told Jonathan the truth and told him I'm going to win, and I drove off. I understood that this sudden turn of events had changed everything when I was standing alone on the steps. The gloves were off now. It wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was also about getting justice and taking back my story. The road ahead would be tough, I knew. I knew that, but I was ready for anything that came next, because I had something to prove to myself, not just to Jonathan or the world. The surprise turn of events had changed everything. I was turned upside down again, but this time I was ready. This time I would get out. On top of that, the months that followed were some of the hardest of my life because the divorce took so long. Day after day brought new problems and heartaches, but with each one, I got stronger. Determined Evelyn, my loyal lawyer and now friend, worked very hard to counter Jonathan's aggressive behaviour. We spent countless hours reading and putting together evidence for our cause. It was tiring getting ready for court, but I wouldn't give up on the kids. Lucky for them, their hearts held strong through it all. Emily was 10 years old. She could understand some of what was going on. She'd sometimes curl up next to me on Clara's couch and Mum asked me one night with serious brown eyes, "Is Dad a bad person?" I wasn't always sure how to answer. Now I pulled her close and carefully said, "No, honey, your dad isn't bad." He messed up and isn't being nice right now, but he still loves you and Max a lot. Max was 8 years old when he had his first child. More than anything else, he'd ask almost every day when we were leaving for home and Dad was coming back. It broke my heart even more. Clara was my rock through it all. She let us stay in her house forever, helped us with the kids, and was there for me when things were at their worst. At times, I don't know how I would have gotten through without her. As the court date got closer, the stress grew. It was Jonathan's PR effort that made me look like a spiteful gold-digging wife, and I believed it. There were times when I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops whenever I went out in public. Evelyn always told people to be patient and let the fact speak for itself. She would say that the truth would come out, in court, and it did come out. The day of the hearing was bright and clear, in sharp contrast to the storm that was raging inside me as I put on the conservative suit Evelyn had told me to wear, saw myself in the mirror. The lady looking back at me was not the same as the one who had walked into that room. At the anniversary dinner a few months ago, everyone was ready to fight. The courtroom was packed. The air was tense and Jonathan was sitting on the other side with his lawyer. They looked polished and sure of themselves, but as I saw a flash of something else when our eyes briefly met, doubt, sorrow. Though I wasn't sure, I braced myself for what was to come as the hearings began. Jonathan's lawyer went on the offence right away, making me look like a manipulative Sikh